all of this comes down to the claim that this is the Jewish homeland and that they have every right to be there, that they're the indigenous people, and that the people who are there are these Arabs who've come from other places and that they shouldn't be there. And so I want to play this for you. This is Naftali Bennett. He has been the opposition of Netanyahu. He's many think would be the next prime minister, and yet these are the types of things he believes. He has this 3-minute. He says this is a 3-minute why 3 minutes of the history of Jews and Zionism. Let's watch what he has to say, and then we're going to break it down.
I'll do something I've never done, and I'll try in 3 minutes to do the history of Jews and Zionism, starting now. The Jewish people first entered the land of Israel 3,300 years ago, and everyone can read that in the Bible. Assuming you don't believe the Bible, then you can look at archaeology, which shows evidence of about 3,000 years ago. There's no dispute that.
Hold on a second. I want to pause this. Let me just go ahead and do a pause. So let's back this up just for a second. So he says, let's go ahead and play this.
Then you can look at archaeology. Jewish people first entered.
There it is. The Jewish people first entered. So he's saying the Jewish people first entered.
Jewish people first entered the land of Israel 3,300 years.
Okay, so they came from somewhere else, right? So he's going to tell us this is why the Jewish people belong here. This is why these other people don't belong here. And he's saying, first of all, the people were here. They came to the land 3,300 years ago. And if you don't believe the Bible, then you can believe archaeology. They came to the land 3,000 years ago. So there were people already there. This wasn't, in the Bible, it even says this wasn't like desolate, just empty land. There were people that were there, the Canaanites, and that Abraham showed up with his family. So where does scholars say Abraham came from? Well, scholars say that, says the Bible states that Abraham was raised in Ur of the Chaldeans. Most scholars agree that that area was the Sumerian city of, anyway, they say it's about the city where Abraham comes from is about 200 miles southeast of Baghdad. I can't pronounce all the names, but 200 miles southeast of Baghdad in lower Mesopotamia in what is now modern day Iraq. So he comes from Iraq. That's where Abraham comes from. That's where the Jewish people come from, because it was Abraham's children. He had 13 children, 12 of them boys, one of them a girl. So there was the 12 tribes of Israel. And that's the Jewish people. Some of that is the Jewish people. So they didn't even come from there, but he's admitting that, but he's saying, but let's keep watching.
And everyone can read that in the Bible. Assuming you don't believe the Bible, then you can look at archaeology, which shows evidence of about 3,000 years ago. There's no dispute that the Jewish people founded their first commonwealth, the kingdom of David, 3,000 years ago. It was destroyed. We were kicked out. We came back, founded the second Commonwealth of Israel, which went on for several hundred years. And again, it was destroyed, this time by the Romans. Jews stayed in Israel, but few Jews stayed in Israel. The rest of the Jews were kicked out to all across the world. And every day they prayed 3 times a day that they want to return to Israel. And it was
okay. So let's pause right there for just a second. So he says the Jews stayed in Israel, so a few Jews stayed in Israel. The rest of the Jews were kicked out all across the world. Okay, where did the Jews go? So the 10 lost tribes. So there were the 12 tribes of Israel were actually 13 tribes, because one of the tribes was actually split into 2, Ephraim and Manasseh. So there's 13 tribes effectively. Most of them were lost. There were a couple of them that remained. We know the history of those people and they were the Jewish people that stuck around, that were there. We know that those people were there. The 10 lost tribes, however, let me just read this to you. The king of Assyria captured Samaria, and he carried them away to Assyria and placed them in Hala and on the harbor, the river of Gozan, and the cities of Medes. So in the years 722 to 721 BC, the 10 tribes who comprised the northern kingdom of Israel disappeared, conquered by the Assyrian king. They were exiled to Upper Mesopotamia, today modern Syria and Iraq. So they're Arabs. So these are the 10 lost tribes. They weren't lost like they disappeared into nothingness. They were lost in that they lost their identity. They lost their Jewishness. They lost their the religion that they believed. They lost their ancestral identity. They don't know who they are anymore, meaning they are not Jewish people who identify as Jewish. And we know from these stories that they were carried off to Syria and Iraq, meaning that the Arabs who then would come back into the area would be potentially these very people who are actual descendants of Abraham, if you believe all of that, right? So let's keep going what he has to say. But where are those people? They weren't all around the world. They were carried. You couldn't travel all around the world very easily in that era. You made it just a little ways away, and many of them made it into what would later become Arab land.
It's a pretty lousy 2,000 years, pogroms, Holocaust. But about 150 years ago, secular Jews, primarily Herzl, Jabotinsky, and others, took the initiative. Let's come back to our own homeland. The Jews are the indigenous people of the land of Israel.
No, they're not. He admitted that right up front. Up front, he said the Jewish people first came to the area of Israel 3,300 years ago. That means they're not from there. We know where they're from. According to historians, Abraham, if you believe all of this, is from Iraq. So they're Iraqis, and yet they're taking this other piece of land rather than Iraq, but maybe Iraq's next. I don't know. And then he's saying that these are the indigenous people. We know that they're not. He's saying that Herzl, who was an Austrian, took the initiative to go back to the homeland. But what we know is that there were periods of time it's not common now to convert to Judaism, but there were periods of time where there were massive conversions to Judaism. For example, the Romans, during the Roman times, there was quite a bit of conversion to Judaism. Take into consideration, 10% of their population was Jewish. Many of them had converted to Judaism. Compare that to the United States, where the population of the Jewish population here is like 4% or something really small. So in the Roman times, and this is actually the second largest hub of Jews outside of Israel is here in the United States. So there was a lot of Romans who converted, including Roman elites like Queen Helena and Nero converted to Judaism. Nero. There was also mass conversion within the Roman Empire itself. We also know that there was a lot of other conversions that happened with the Khazars, for example, the Khazarian Empire, which takes up modern-day Ukraine, parts of Russia, not Czechoslovakia. Let me pull up the map here. The various different, so pretty much, Georgia, Russia, and Ukraine predominantly is where the Khazar Empire was. And Herzl and many of the early Zionists came from that region. They're Austrian, Russian, coming from that region, where we know that there was later on, many years after any of these biblical stories, there was a lot of conversion to Judaism. Many people assert that Herzl and many of the Ashkenazi Jews that come from these Eastern European areas are actually descendants of converts. Yes, they've been Jewish for many, many, many years. I don't dispute their Jewishness, because I believe being Jewish is a religion. You can believe whatever it is you believe. But their Jewishness does not stem from an ethnic tie to that region. It stems from a religious tie to a religion, to a family ancestors who converted at some point. Let's keep hearing what he has to say.
The term Palestine was coined by the Romans in order to dissociate the place that was called Judea until now. It had no connection to Arabs, for the simple reason that Arabs arrived to the land of Palestine only 600 years later during the Arab conquering. So there were no Arabs in the land of Israel.
Okay, so if the Romans were saying, okay, we're going to call this Palestine because we want to de-Judaize the area, then a lot of the people who were Jews in that area would now be, over many generations, would identify as just part of Palestine, Palestinian. That's what they would think. It's just like, I live in California. I don't identify it as Mexico. There were many generations long ago that did, because it was, but now it's not. So now it's California. I think I'm an American, right? Identities change. But it doesn't mean, when you look at, for example, a better example, I'm not a good example of that, but when you look at the Mexican Americans living in Texas, for example, the Mexican Americans I know in Texas have been there. They've never left. That they were there. They've been there the whole time. And then it one time was Mexico, and then the next day it was America. And they were like, okay, I guess now we're Americans. They identify as Americans. They don't identify as Mexicans nationally. They believe they're living in Texas. They believe it's America. That's how they identify. That doesn't erase the fact that they're the indigenous people of that land just because they change the moniker, they change the flag, they change how they identify themselves.
But yes, throughout those 1,400 years, very slowly, Arabs came mostly when Jews returned in the 19th century.
First of all, that's not true. He's saying that Jews suddenly went back with Herzl, and the Jews were there, and then the Arabs came along, and the Arabs started showing up when the Jews were there. We know that is absolutely not a fact, that the Jews began arriving, and there were people there in Palestine. There were people that were living there. They were Arabic-speaking people in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and right before World War II and after World War II, and that they made up the majority of the population, not the Jews. And then Arabs came in. It was the other way around.
The world decided, I'm cutting long story short, to bring a tough solution to both sides, to divide the land between a Jewish state and an Arab state. It wasn't called Palestinian. Jews said yes, Arabs said no. This was the Peel Commission. Fast forward 1947, the UN came up with the same sort of idea, divide into a Jewish state, an Arab state. Jews said yes, Arabs said no, attacked the Jews and wanted to kill all the Jews. The Jews fought back, won. During that war.
So that's the issue when they conflate, they're saying the Jews, when really this was the Zionists, right? These are Zionist settlers that were there. They happen to have a religion of being Jewish. That's not why they were attacked. They were attacked. There was war, there was contention, because they had made it clear they wanted to take much of the land for themselves to create a Jewish nation that would not include all of these Arab people who were already living in that region and in that land, and who were desperately seeking, after many years of being under various different empires, they wanted to have their own autonomy. And so it wasn't this, we're just going after the Jews. But there is this conflation that's happening, and you're hearing it right here. He's conflating it on purpose so that people feel then sympathy for the Jewish people and say, oh no, Jewish people are under attack once again. These were Zionists who were under attack.
600,000 Arabs that had been living in smaller Israel fled, and some of them were also expelled, because that's what happens when you try and kill your enemy and you lose. That's what happened throughout history. We founded the State of Israel, and that's where we are now. So the State of Israel is the third time we have a Jewish state on our indigenous land. We have 2 million Arabs living in the State of Israel, full Israeli citizens. They vote, they serve on court, they pay taxes. They're one of all and enjoy full equal rights.
No, they don't.
That's the
so
story
I'll tell
of
you,
Israel.
The Arab population in Israel, those who have Israeli citizenship, he's right. They do have the same rights, the same basic rights, the same, they're supposed to be treated in the same way by the courts, by the police, rights that people in the West Bank do not have, rights that Gazans do not have. They do have those same basic human rights. They don't have the same rights in that they cannot marry whoever they want. An Arab Israeli who meets, there's 2 million of them, but they go outside to maybe the West Bank, they meet a nice girl, they cannot bring her back in to live in Israel. The process is extremely difficult to try to get permission for that. The Israeli government is not looking to import Arabs into Israel, so they highly discourage this, and they don't give out permits very often. That means that Arab is forced to then move to the West Bank, which is what Israel wants. However, a Jewish Israeli is allowed to go and find some random woman 6,000 miles away who has absolutely no connection to the land whatsoever and say, well, I married her, she's Jewish, so she's coming here to live with us, and she's granted that ability automatically. So they're not given the same exact rights. They're not able to immigrate in their family members, immigrate in their loved ones. And if they leave, they're not, it's the process of coming back. Actually, I'm not 100% certain if an Arab Israeli leaves. I know that if a Jerusalemite who doesn't carry actual Israeli citizenship, I know that if they leave Jerusalem, they lose their Jerusalemite status and then they can't really come back. I'm not 100% certain about an Arab Israeli if they lose their Israeli citizenship if they move away. However, they certainly don't have the same rights when it comes to marriage, family, and immigration. That is strictly for Jewish people so that Israel can keep its Jewish character and limit the number of others, the number of non-Jews living there. So that's Naftali Bennett. That's his 3-minute, the breakdown of why we belong here and they don't. He's the former prime minister of Israel. He's likely to maybe be another prime minister in the future if Netanyahu is ousted. Naftali Bennett might get that slot again. Who knows? But you see, he's still just as extreme as the rest. They're all super extreme. But I just wanted to kind of give that breakdown because it was really, that is the thinking. And yet from the very beginning, when they say, well, the Jews first arrived back 3,000 years ago. So now it's just a matter of, well, then whose land is it? I guess it's based on, who can prove their existence further back. Many of the people living in Palestine today can, in fact, prove their existence all the way back to the Canaanites, in which case they're the indigenous people. They were there first. They're not, they were there before Abraham and his ilk showed up. So I guess we're just going to play that game. Who got here first, rather than actually just assessing the reality of the situation, which is you're committing an ethnic cleansing campaign to get these people off the land. You don't want them there. And this is the reason why, because you think the land is yours.